Hey everyone, and welcome back to Hacker News Daily Podcast, where we break down the top stories that got the tech community talking. I'm your host, and today we're diving into yesterday's most heated discussions from across 23 stories that hit the front page. We've got quite a lineup for you, from Apple's silently corrupting wedding photos to YouTube's war on ad blockers, from Slack holding a nonprofit's data hostage to some major WebAssembly news that's been years in the making. Plus, we'll dig into why the tech community is up in arms about a potential TikTok deal that has people questioning everything about free markets and government intervention. These 5 stories dominated the conversation yesterday, generating thousands of comments and really striking a nerve with developers, creators, and tech enthusiasts alike. So let's jump right in with a story that has photographers and Apple users absolutely horrified. All right, switching gears here to something that's honestly pretty alarming. We've got a story about Apple Photos app corrupting images, and this one really struck a nerve in the community with over 1,000 points and nearly 300 comments. So here's what happened. A photographer was shooting a family wedding with their OM system OM1 camera, and they discovered that Apple's Photos app has been silently corrupting images during the import process. And when I say silently, I mean this is the kind of bug that's almost designed to go unnoticed. We're talking maybe 1 or 2 corrupted images out of thousands initially. The really devastating part, they had that delete after import feature turned on, which means the original uncorrupted files on the SD card were getting permanently wiped. This person lost about 30% of their wedding photos. 30%! Can you imagine? What makes this particularly insidious is the inconsistency of the corruption. Sometimes it hits the JPEG, sometimes the RAW file, sometimes both versions of the same image. It's like playing Russian roulette with your memories. And the fact that it starts small, just a couple images here and there, means you might not even notice until it's way too late, until you've already imported and deleted hundreds or thousands of photos. Now, the discussion thread on this is fascinating because it reveals this isn't an isolated incident. We're seeing reports of various corruption issues across different scenarios with Apple Photos. Some folks are speculating this is likely a concurrency bug in the import pipeline. You know, when the app is trying to do too many things at once during that complex import process and something gets scrambled in the shuffle. But here's where it gets interesting. There's actually some debate about whether this is entirely Apple's fault. One commenter, Spike021, says they've been using photos for 8 years with Sony cameras, tens of thousands of photos, 0 issues. And another user pointed out that the OM1 camera actually has documented USB transfer issues in its own manual. So we might be looking at a perfect storm situation where a quirky camera meets a fragile import process. That said, the broader pattern here is pretty concerning. People in the thread are bringing up a whole history of Apple's software corrupting user data. Not just photos, but iTunes eating music libraries, iCloud sync issues. It's painting a picture of systemic quality control problems that really shouldn't exist in software that people trust with their irreplaceable memories. What really gets me is how this represents such a fundamental breach of trust. We're not talking about a feature that doesn't work quite right or an interface that's confusing. This is about data integrity, the absolute baseline expectation that when you import your photos, they'll actually, still be photos on the other side. The fact that Apple's own first-party app, the one that comes pre-installed and that millions of people use without thinking twice about it, could be silently destroying people's wedding photos, their kids' first steps, their last photos with loved ones. That's just unacceptable. The community response has been really telling too. You've got people sharing all these elaborate workarounds and alternative workflows they've developed specifically to avoid trusting Apple with the import process. Some are using third-party apps, others are manually copying files first, and there's a whole contingent that's moved to self-hosted solutions entirely. When your users are going to those lengths to work around your software, that's not just a bug, that's a crisis of confidence. And you know what's really frustrating? This isn't some edge case with an obscure file format or a weird camera from 1995. The OM1 is a modern, professional-grade camera, and we're talking about standard RAW and JPEG files. If photos can't reliably handle that, I mean, what exactly can we trust it with? The silence from Apple on this is deafening too. With something this serious, affecting the integrity of people's photo libraries, you'd expect some kind of acknowledgement, a fix, something. But instead we've got photographers out there playing detective, trying to figure out patterns in the corruption, warning each other on forums, developing defensive strategies. It's like we're all beta testers, except the stakes are our actual memories. Speaking of trust in technology and fundamental breaches of expectations, let's talk about another story that has people questioning their relationship with software vendors. Slack price increase. Now, turning to our next story, and this one's got the community pretty fired up. Slack has raised our charges by $195,000 per year. Yeah, you heard that right, a $195,000 increase. This is about Hack Club, a nonprofit that teaches teenagers to code, and they're basically being held hostage by Salesforce. So here's what happened. Hack Club has been using Slack for 11 years. I mean, that's practically since Slack launched, right? They were already paying $5,000 a year, which for a nonprofit isn't nothing. Then, out of nowhere, Slack drops this bombshell. Your new bill is $200,000 a year. That's a 40 times increase. And here's the kicker, they gave them less than a week's notice. Pay 50 grand immediately this week, plus the full 200K going forward, or we're deleting your entire workspace. All your history, all your conversations, everything gone. Now, the Hacker News community is having a field day with this one. 369 points, 200 comments, and the discussion is, well, it's complicated. Some folks are absolutely outraged. They're pointing out that Salesforce is worth $230 billion, and here they are, strong-arming a nonprofit that helps teenagers to learn to code. The optics alone are terrible, right? But then you've got this other camp that's saying, hold on, what's the full story here? Because when you do the math, $200,000 in Slack pricing implies they've got something like 2,000 active members. That's not exactly a tiny operation. And someone dug up their financials. Apparently, Hack Club had $11.4 million in revenue in 2023 with $10 million in assets. So some commenters are wondering if maybe they lost their nonprofit discount eligibility or got reclassified somehow. What's really fascinating about this whole situation, though, is how it sparked this broader conversation about SaaS vendor lock-in. One commenter called it ransomware as a service, which, ouch, but kind of accurate. You build your entire organizational memory in someone else's platform, and then they can just change the rules whenever they want. Your data becomes their leverage. The self-hosting crowd is having their moment here, too. People are recommending everything from Zulip to Mattermost, which is actually what Hack Club is migrating to now, to this new thing called Campfire that 37 Signals just released. There's this real sense of vindication from folks who've been warning about cloud dependency for years. Like, see, this is exactly what we've been talking about. But here's what really gets me about this story. It's the timing and the approach. Even if Hack Club somehow fell out of compliance with nonprofit pricing, even if there's some legitimate reason for the price change, giving them less than a week, threatening to delete 11 years of institutional knowledge, that's just brutal. One commenter made a great point. They said this feels like Salesforce is in panic mode, trying to juice revenue numbers wherever they can. And honestly, given Salesforce's recent performance and all the layoffs they've had, it kind of tracks. The founder of Hack Club actually showed up in the comments, and you can feel the desperation. They're scrambling to export their data, trying to preserve all these years of conversations and community building. They mentioned they've got channels with hundreds of thousands of messages from students sharing their coding projects, getting help, building connections, and Slack's just ready to nuke all of it over a pricing dispute. What nobody's really talking about enough, though, is the precedent this sets. If Salesforce can do this to a nonprofit working with teenagers, what's stopping them from doing it to any organization? Today, it's Hack Club. Tomorrow, it could be any startup or small business that suddenly finds themselves on the wrong side of a pricing algorithm. The migration story is pretty interesting, too. They're moving to self-hosted Mattermost, which, good for them, but man, what a nightmare to do under pressure. 11 years of being on one platform, all your workflows, all your integrations, your entire community trained on Slack's interface, and now you've got days to replicate all of that somewhere else. It's like being evicted from your house with a week's notice and having to rebuild everything from scratch. You know what's wild? This whole situation is probably the best advertisement for self-hosting and open source that money can't buy. Every CTO watching this unfold is probably having that uncomfortable conversation about their own vendor dependencies right about now. And speaking of platforms wielding your power in controversial ways, YouTube's got its own drama brewing with content creators and viewers. All right, let's dive into something that's got the tech community pretty fired up. YouTube says they've figured out why some creators are seeing their view counts drop, and they're pointing the finger at ad blockers. This story from 9 to 5 Google has sparked quite the debate with nearly 600 comments on Hacker News. And honestly, the community is not buying what YouTube is selling here. So here's what's happening. YouTube came out and basically said, hey, if you're using an ad blocker, it might be messing with our ability to count views properly. And on the surface, that sounds like a technical glitch, right? But when you dig into the discussion, there's this fascinating technical explanation that's emerged. Apparently, the Easy Privacy Blocklist, which a lot of ad blockers use, recently added a YouTube endpoint called API/@statsATR to their block list. Now, this endpoint, it's doing double duty. It's tracking users for analytics, sure, but it's also the same endpoint YouTube uses to register legitimate view counts. The community reaction has been, let's just say skeptical is putting it mildly. One of the most interesting takes I saw was from someone pointing out that their views tanked, but their revenue stayed exactly the same. Think about that for a second. If views are dropping, but the money isn't changing, what does that tell you about what YouTube actually considers important? This person called views vanity metrics, and honestly, they might have a point. But here's where it gets really spicy. The overwhelming sentiment in the discussion is that people feel completely justified using ad blockers on YouTube. And the reasons they're giving, wow, we're talking about 50-minute podcast ads interrupting videos. 50 minutes! Someone else mentioned getting straight-up phishing scams as ads. Another person said they got the same ad 17 times in a row. 17! Can you imagine? You're trying to watch a 10-minute video and you're spending more time skipping the same ad over and over than actually watching content. There's this really interesting technical debate happening too. One commenter, Minersburg, actually defended YouTube's position, arguing that they have what they called a legitimate interest in tracking these stats to verify real views and prevent manipulation. They're saying this isn't really about ad blocking at all. It's about privacy lists being overly aggressive and accidentally breaking core functionality. It's like, imagine if your spam filter started blocking all emails with attachments because some spam has attachments. Sure, you're protected, but you're also missing legitimate stuff. But then the counter-argument is equally compelling. People are saying, look, YouTube created this situation themselves. They made the ad experience so unbearable, so invasive, that users had no choice but to protect themselves. And now, YouTube is essentially weaponizing view counts to pressure both creators and viewers into compliance. Some folks in the comments are even worried this could escalate. There was this dark comparison to the old MPAA and RIAA lawsuits, suggesting YouTube might start banning accounts or even seeking damages from ad blocker users. What really struck me, though, is how this highlights the fundamental tension in the modern web. YouTube wants to track everything. They say it's for legitimate reasons like preventing view manipulation and ensuring creators get paid properly. But users are increasingly saying, no, we don't trust you with that data, especially when you're also serving us malicious ads and hour-long interruptions. It's this impossible situation where both sides have valid points, but their needs are fundamentally incompatible. The technical folks in the comments are suggesting workarounds already, talking about selective unblocking of just that one endpoint to restore view counts while keeping ads blocked, but that feels like we're just playing whack-a-mole, doesn't it? YouTube changes something, blockers adapt, YouTube responds, and round we go. You know what's really telling? Nobody in that entire discussion thread was saying, "Oh, I love YouTube ads. I never block them." Not a single person. Even the people defending YouTube's technical position weren't defending the ad experience itself. That should tell YouTube something, but I'm not holding my breath for them to actually listen. Now, speaking of big tech companies making controversial moves, let's talk about another platform that's been at the center of intense debate, TikTok, and a potential deal that the tech community is questioning everything about free markets and government intervention. All right, now we're diving into something that's got the Hacker News community absolutely fired up. U.S. investors trump close in on TikTok deal with China. This story pulled in 366 points and a whopping 481 comments. And honestly, after reading through the discussion, I can see why people are so worked up about this. So here's what's happening. We've got reports of a potential deal involving U.S. investors and the Trump administration to essentially create an American version of TikTok. And the community reaction? Well, let's just say the skepticism is off the charts. What's really fascinating is how this discussion immediately zeroed in on the fundamental contradictions here. You've got commenters pointing out the incredible irony. For years, we've heard criticism of China's state capitalism, where the government has its fingers in private companies, and now we're talking about the U.S. government potentially appointing board members to oversee an American TikTok. I mean, come on, that's exactly the kind of thing we've been criticizing other countries for doing. One commenter made this really sharp observation. They said this feels like part of a broader pattern where conservative interests are systematically taking control of social media platforms, first Twitter, now potentially TikTok, and the goal seems to be controlling the narrative. That's a pretty heavy accusation, but when you look at the moves being made, you can understand why people are connecting those dots. Now, there's this really interesting alternative perspective that caught my eye. One user, G8Os, suggests that TikTok actually threatens what they call Western consensus manufacturing, particularly around coverage of events in Gaza. Their argument is that TikTok's algorithm wasn't playing by the usual rules of Western media narratives, and this deal is essentially about regaining control of that information flow. Whether you buy that or not, it's definitely food for thought about why this is happening now. The technical side of this is equally skeptical. People are really questioning whether Oracle, Oracle of all companies, has what it takes to run a consumer social media platform. I mean, when was the last time Oracle built something that teenagers actually wanted to use? The comparisons to Yahoo buying Tumblr are brutal, but kind of fair. We've seen this movie before, where a company that doesn't understand a platform's culture tries to take it over, and it rarely ends well. But here's the thing that really gets me. The whole premise seems fundamentally flawed. The proposal apparently involves creating a US-specific version of TikTok separate from the global platform. Think about that for a second. TikTok's entire appeal is that it's this global phenomenon where trends can start anywhere and spread everywhere. You split that up, you potentially kill what makes it special. It's like, imagine if we had a US-only version of the internet. Defeats the whole purpose, right? There's also this undercurrent in the discussion about whether any of this is even necessary. Sure, one commenter argues that TikTok has the worst misinformation problem among social platforms, and that's a legitimate concern. But does that justify this level of government intervention? We're essentially talking about the government picking winners and losers in the social media space, and that should make everyone uncomfortable, regardless of your political leanings. What's really striking is how this whole situation has people questioning fundamental principles about free markets and government intervention. The same folks who typically champion minimal government involvement in business are now apparently okay with the government essentially orchestrating a forced sale and restructuring of a major tech platform. The cognitive dissonance is real, and the Hacker News community is not letting it slide. The discussion also touches on the practical reality that users might just leave. If TikTok becomes some sanitized government-influenced platform, what's stopping everyone from jumping to the next app? We've seen social media migrations before. Remember when everyone was on MySpace? The internet routes around censorship and control, and teenagers are particularly good at finding the next cool thing that adults haven't ruined yet. You know what this really reminds me of? It's like we're watching two different versions of techno-nationalism clash, and regular users are caught in the middle. On one side, you've got concerns about Chinese influence through TikTok, and on the other, you've got concerns about US government overreach. And meanwhile, people just want to watch funny videos and share memes. The pessimism in these comments is palpable. Nobody seems to think this will end well. Not for users, not for innovation, and certainly not for the principles of open markets that we supposedly value. It's a mess of contradictions, political maneuvering, and technical challenges that, honestly, sounds like a recipe for disaster. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom in tech news. Let's shift gears to something that's actually moving the web forward, a major milestone for WebAssembly that developers have been waiting years for. All right, moving on to our next story. WebAssembly 3.0 is officially complete, and this is actually a pretty huge deal that's been years in the making. The W3C community group just dropped this release after 3 years of development since version 2.0, and some of these features, they've been cooking for 6 to 8 years. That's like an eternity in web standards time. So here's what's got everyone talking. And with 742 points and almost 300 comments on Hacker News, people are definitely paying attention. The headline feature is 64-bit address space support. We're going from being stuck with 4 gigabytes of addressable memory to, get this, theoretically, 16 exabytes. Now, before you get too excited, browsers are capping it at 16 gigs for security reasons, which is still a massive improvement, but it shows this interesting tension between WASM wanting to be this universal runtime and the reality of browser constraints. What's fascinating is how this changes the game for serious web applications. The comments are full of developers from companies like Figma and folks working on CAD tools who've been desperately waiting for this. Imagine trying to edit 4K video in a browser with a 4 gig memory limit. It's like trying to fill a swimming pool with a coffee cup. Now we're talking fire hose territory. But here's where it gets really interesting. They've also added support for multiple memories per module. And apparently, this is wild, WASM could always use multiple memory objects, just not in a single module. One commenter pointed out that this was a widespread misunderstanding even among developers who work with this stuff. It's like finding out your car had a turbo button the whole time, but nobody told you about it. The garbage collection support is generating the most heated debate, though. On one hand, you've got developers excited that maybe, finally, we can port languages like Python or Java to WASM without jumping through flaming hoops. But then you've got the realists in the comments saying, hold up, this isn't the magic bullet you think it is. One user, Priomer, makes a compelling case that C++ and Rust are still going to be your go-to languages for WASM, and this GC implementation won't suddenly make it easy to export from Python or C#. What really struck me reading through the discussion is this underlying frustration about DOM access, or rather the complete lack of it. Multiple commenters are basically asking, when can we finally ditch JavaScript? And the answer seems to be, not anytime soon. It's like WASM is this incredibly powerful engine, but it still needs JavaScript to be its steering wheel, and developers are getting impatient with that arrangement. There's also this interesting subplot about embedded systems. One commenter, Boric, raises concerns that the 64 KB page sizes are problematic for microcontrollers. It's a reminder that WASM isn't just about web browsers anymore. People want to run this everywhere from tiny IoT devices to massive server farms. And those competing needs create real technical challenges.
You know what this reminds me of? It's like WASM is going through its awkward teenage years. It's gotten bigger and stronger with these new features, but it's still figuring out what it wants to be when it grows up. Is it a web technology, a universal runtime, a replacement for JavaScript? The answer seems to be yes to all of the above, but not quite yet. The timing is interesting too. 3 years between major releases in the JavaScript ecosystem feels like decades. But for a standard that's trying to be this foundational, maybe that's the right pace. These aren't features you can just ship and fix later. They need to work across every browser, every platform, for potentially decades to come. What's clear from the community reaction is that people are hungry for WASM to fulfill its original promise. The excitement is there, the use cases are real, from Figma doing design work to AutoCAD in the browser to machine learning models running client-side. But there's also this sense that we're still waiting for that killer feature, or that breakthrough moment where WASM becomes as essential as JavaScript itself. For now, though, WASM 3.0 is a solid step forward. Those 64-bit addresses alone are going to unlock some serious applications, and the multiple memories feature could enable some clever security and performance optimizations. Whether it's the breakthrough everyone's been waiting for, well, I guess we'll see what developers build with it.
Thanks for joining me for this roundup of yesterday's biggest stories from Hacker News. If you found this valuable, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's episode, where we'll break down whatever new controversies, breakthroughs, and heated debates emerge from the tech world. Until then, keep questioning, keep building, and maybe keep those backups of your photos somewhere safe. This has been your Hacker News Daily Podcast. I'll see you tomorrow.